All right, guys, welcome to another podcast. Today, I have a very special guest because if you've noticed in the last podcast, I've been addressing this issue that I've been finding to be very troublesome, where you have Christian conservatives in mainly North America that are gaining the most attention, if you will, because of the podcast, because of their platform, because of English, and they're able to spread their message more. But really, this is something that is not just centrally to North America. It's not just in that part of the world where these issues are an issue, but also um, in Europe, in England, France, Sweden. It's globally happening. Okay, this phenomenon where you have basically Christians who have been traditionally from a conservative standpoint in their politics and their worldview, biblical worldviews, etc. And they are turning on Israel right now in mass, it feels like. And to me, it was concerning because not that I care that we need to support the world in order to exist, in order to legitimize our statehood or anything like that. Um, but for me, it's important that Christians, at least when you make a decision, that you understand the position that you're taking and how that can affect you as an individual, as a community, and so on. And so I have today on the podcast to discuss some of these subjects, who, in my opinion, is one of the top experts in the world on this issue. Um, Not because he's an American, but because he comes from the background of being a Christian, the son of a pastor in Sweden, and well-known international speaker and writer of some really, really powerful books that have gone all over the world. They've been published on the issues mainly concerning Israel. Both he and his father live in Israel and have lived in Israel with their families for many years. And to me, that's what makes them having a little bit more of a weight behind what they're saying, because they're boots on the ground. They live here, they know the reality, they understand it much better than most pundits out there who are giving their opinion from the comfort of their armchair on the other side of the pond, thinking they really understand the matters when these folks have seen it, lived it, and experienced it. So today I have John Enarson. John Enarson is the Christian Relations Director of Cry for Zion. If those of you who have been following the podcast haven't followed, I happen to be the founder of the Cry for Zion movement. It is a Temple Mount movement where we are trying to educate Christians around the world about the Temple Mount here in Israel, both politically, spiritually, etc., how this affects us in Israel and how it affects the world in general. So John is my Christian Relations Director, and he's the one that we have had many conversations on these different issues. And I said, hey, get on the podcast. Let's discuss it, because you understand this better than I do. You can articulate better than I do. And John, thank you for getting on the show. And let's hear what you got to say about this, bro.
Yeah, sure. We were just talking yesterday, communicating about the bill that was in America about anti-Semitism legislation. I think it's Bill HR 6090 in the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
and some of the perspectives on that. And it really is a multifaceted problem. And I think a lot of people have made mistakes with it. So, what I was really saying to you that I think brought on this discussion is I know pro Israel American conservatives who are against the bill, and I know religious conservative Jewish um, friends who are against the bill, who are pro Israel, for a number of reasons. And why? Um, First off, I don't like talking about myself, but because of these conversations, it just has to be, people have to understand and be clear. I would see myself as a conservative. I'm a Christian. I study theology. I've lived a number of years in the US and in Israel and in Sweden. So I have some of that experience, and I study theology at a school and hold a position of being conservative Bible believing. So I'm not like liberal on the Bible.
Hmm.
So as long as people understand that's where these comments are coming from, it's not that I'm saying, oh, like, well, that was the Bible and that's a 2,000 year old, thousands of year old bad book, and Christianity has updated since then. No, I'm not liberal Christian in that sense.
Like your
I believe
iPhone,
the Bible
right?
is God's
You
word.
hit
Yeah,
you hit the update. It's like, oh no, we're version 2.0. Like,
right. I don't believe in progressive Christianity as it's called now, or emerging church as it was called when we were younger.
yeah.
So no, but so a number of things can be true at the same time about the bill. Is it a foolish bill politically in an American context in 2024? Yes. And I have Jewish and Christian friends who both agree that it is. Next, does it outlaw the New Testament and parts of the New Testament? No, it doesn't. Will it be perceived by American conservatives as if it is? Yes.
Yeah.
um, and so, like, another thing is that the the people who introduced the bill have made a tactical mistake in American political circumstances today, because American conservatives have been fighting for 50 years against leftists who have been misusing charges of racism to fight against conservatives, against Christians, to silence them and to be their political opponents, and have been radical progressives in society. And they've been using the lever of racism, including anti Semitism, including very liberal Jewish groups who have been weaponized today, like the ADL, in order
Hmm.
to fight against conservatives and to restrict speech, restrict freedom of speech. Um, so in order to fight a real problem of anti-Semitism on whether it be American college campuses or something like that, you make a strategic mistake by introducing a bill like this. Like, I've heard
Hmm.
conservatives say, like, if the Republicans would just have sat down and be quiet and um, let the left make total fools of themselves by being fanboys for Hamas politically, let them do that. Um, why get into this fight? Now, there are others who say, look, anti Semitism is a problem. Are we just supposed to sit down? I mean, it's rampant since the war has started. It's exploded across America, and it's even divided the conservative right in America for and against Israel and even
Yeah.
the Jewish people.
Yeah. Since the war in Gaza, just to be clear, so people understand you said since the war. Um,
Yeah.
so, because to us, it's like, it's the only, what other war is there happening right now, right? Um,
Hmm.
and that's exactly it. That's what I've noticed online, that as this war in Gaza is progressing, and that the Hamas numbers that are inflated keep pushing out massive amounts of civilian casualties that are dying, and how the IDF is just brutalizing the Palestinian population of Gaza in order to accomplish their mission of destroying Hamas and getting their hostages back. And we get it. That's your mission, but the price, right? The price
Hmm.
that the Palestinians are paying. First of all, and this is, I think I've made this clear, I don't know how many times, but just to clarify one more time, I serve and have been serving since day one in the conflict, in combat. I've been on every front that the military has been in Gaza, almost every front. And what I can tell you from boots on the ground reality, it's not at all what you're seeing in the media. We are very, very methodical, very careful in all of our missions. And yes, there has been human casualties. There have been horrible incidences where we got drawn into a trap by Hamas that uses humanitarian aid organizations and United Nations resources, vehicles, um, storehouses and whatnot, schools, etc. Right? They're using these platforms to move arms, to make us aware because they know that we're aware of them doing this. And then what they do is they set up the trap that basically ends up where we finally react and basically try to eliminate that threat because we know that Hamas has taken over this vehicle or this whatever. Then we strike, and they make sure to have the innocent people that have nothing to do with Hamas. If it's the human aid workers that got killed in one of those airstrikes because their vehicles were being used, and so on. And just now it came out again. Again, we shared the drone footage. Like, look, here's Hamas using the United Nations vehicles, and compounds, and they're transporting weapons. So you get what I'm saying? Like, the point is, what people don't understand is the full picture. They just think that we're willy nilly doing whatever we want. They think that we fight a war the way the United States fights a war or the way Europeans have been fighting wars. And I know soldiers in combat from both countries, and both, or from not both countries, but from the multiple different countries. If it's Canadian Armed Forces, United States Armed Forces, Swedish, Norwegian, these are the people that I've had actual real conversations with, people that have been in combat for their countries. And they keep telling me, like, we would never do what you guys are doing because that's too dangerous to our soldiers. Like the risk that you are
Yeah.
willing to take to minimize human casualties. So I can testify from boots on the ground. I have not seen one child or woman killed in any of the operations that I've been a part of. None of my men have done that. None of the units in my area have done that, operating in the same area. Again, you can either take it from the horse's mouth or you can take it from CNN, BBC, NBC, all these, alphabetical soup news agencies, because they're there, right? They're with us, right? They see exactly what's happening, right? No, they're not there. We do let the media in at certain areas. Obviously, we can't. This is an argument I had with a special forces guy, not online, just on a personal. Like, let's clear the air here on some claims against him, and claims he's making against us. And then one of the things that I pointed out is, because he said, why don't you just let the media join in your missions? I was like, you were a Green Beret. Did you guys have the media on top secret missions you guys carried out? Like, is that really like the hand to play? You're gonna divulge very sensitive information, operational information, which in this case, a lot of the missions are extremely sensitive because we're also trying to trap the terrorists, okay, who are laying traps for us all throughout Gaza. We're also trying to trap them, lure them into their reverse psychology, so to speak. And we're also trying to uh, get our hands on the whereabouts of our hostages, all of which is extremely sensitive, tactical, battlefield uh, tactics that I'm not going to divulge to some bum who works for some agency just to prove that we're not committing any war crimes. So this is the thing, right?
It's
Is that there's just a deterioration of the trust as this drags out, and as Hamas uses the propaganda on the media to gain even conservatives on the conservative side of things to gain their sympathy. That look what Israel's doing to us. So I'm just saying, like, so you're going to get into your points here, but I'm just pointing out as a guy who's literally there, and I can tell you that none of that is true. But what do you want to say about this, John? Because we've been talking
I mean,
about
it's
this and
it's
how this
it's
is
a
troubling
brilliant
you.
it's a brilliant
You know,
tactic by Hamas, and it's the age old tactic. Like, it's just, you just accuse and then you put the other person on the defensive, right? When are you going to start beating your sister? Now you got to prove that you're not abusive to your sister, right?
yeah,
And whereas you have absolutely no proof of that, but then you're just always on the defensive, like, no, we're not committing genocide. Okay, fine. We will make the factual defense on the charge of genocide, which is dividing even conservatives. Candace Owens, going out and saying, like, you can't commit genocide. I won't support Israel, right? Because
I agree. I agree. By the way, I agree. You're right.
yeah, of
Yes, you
course,
can't
you
do
can't
that.
commit genocide. So define the term. What are
So
famous
just to be
genocides
clear,
that we know of? What are
yeah,
famous genocides that we know of? The Holocaust, Darfur, Pol Pot, the Cambodian killing fields. Okay. In Cambodia, I think they killed something like 25% of the population. You kill,
Burma right now, currently,
massive percentages of an entire population. That's what we classically define as a genocide. The only one that's
yeah,
giving out death statistics, which is a strategic mistake on Israel's part, but they allow only Israel's not counting numbers. The only ones who are counting numbers, well, the only ones who are publishing lies is Hamas,
publishing,
and that's
right.
the numbers everyone's going with. But even if you
Hmm.
take their lying statistics at face value,
Hmm.
30,000, 30 something thousand, they back down. Oh, we made some mistakes. Maybe it's less than 30,000. Hamas basically saying, even if you take that, it's absurd to call that percentage a genocide. Secondly, the only
Yeah,
other numbers that we know of is that the IDF has estimated somewhere between 10 and 20,000 of Hamas battalions killed. So you factor that into the number, it's one fighter per approximately two civilians killed, right? No Western military
that's within. Yeah,
can match that statistic. Whether West Point,
correct.
NATO forces, they know they can't match that statistic of uh, of avoiding civilian casualties that Israel's
Yeah,
doing in an urban environment. Right. This
hmm,
may go down
correct.
at the end of the day when the news no longer care and everyone's done their research. This war in Gaza may go down as the war with the least civilian casualties. Against versus combatant killed in the modern Middle East. It's very
Well,
possible.
Well, just to be clear, in within the battlefield, the battle space that you're presented with. So it's not like the most successful, if you will, in, let's say, for example, when you had the Desert Storm, and U.S. forces were going through wide open spaces and targeting military bases and so on and so forth. And literally until they got to Iraq, into the major cities, Mosul, whatever, they didn't.
Right. Mosul,
They, you know, what I'm
urban
saying, there,
warfare.
or yeah, until they literally encountered civilians, right? So to take, in other words, in a comparable in a comparable battle space, that is where exactly we're, in my opinion, we are setting the record for it can be done. You can achieve your objectives with the least amount, absolute least amount of civilian casualties. And mind you, the civilian casualties that we do have is not because we target them. It's because Hamas plants these civilians into areas that we need to target, that rockets have been fired out of or whatever, and they use tunnel systems so they can get those civilians there without us being aware of that. So we take extreme caution, and yet we do still pay a heavy price. To us, it's a heavy price because one person, one civilian that it had nothing to do with the Hamas terrorists, is one too much for me, for my guys, for our military, for our standard. This is us. And so, any case,
The
um,
the way
and by
that
the way,
becomes
you said 2 to 1. That's actually more like 1 to 1 now with the revised numbers that finally came out from the United Nations just recently. And they said, "Oh, we're sorry, women and children. It's actually half the number we thought originally." Well, too late. Now
some
the whole world thinks we're committing genocide. So
the ratio
so
may
the
be
numbers are
one
even
to one.
crazier.
It's
Yeah,
true. The numbers may be 1 to 1, it may be 3 to 1, but either way, it's a miraculous number in a modern war in an urban environment. And Western militaries know it. And even the Western politicians who get up and say Israel should be doing much more to protect civilians, they know that they can't match what Israel's doing to protect civilians. So it's
yeah,
so cynical, right?
yes,
But I find that none of these kind of arguments even matter because the underlying problem is spiritual to me. And without
yeah,
a conservative being a Christian, and even if he's a Christian conservative, having a clear understanding of the scriptures as God's word and his faithfulness to Israel, as the Bible presents it. Wicked spiritual powers in the ideological war will find a lever to turn you against Israel, whether it's because you don't
Mm.
know enough facts about genocide and statistics. And there will always be a lever, whether it's this bill about anti-Semitism in the House of Representatives. Um, I have found that people that you thought you were on the train with, that you were on a parallel trajectory with, all of a sudden now, when the pressure's on and it has to do with Israel, they'll be like, turning against Israel, turning against the Jewish people as a whole,
Mm.
and then saying Christ is king, which I
Right.
believe that Jesus is king. But the way
Mhm.
I will definitely agree with that. But the way that also certain Christians are using that term, whether
Mhm.
it's people like Nick Fuentes, saying horrible things, anti-Semitic things, real racist things, unbiblical things, and then ending it with a tagline, Christ is king, I will call that
Mm.
out. You know,
Yeah.
what do you even what do you even say? That's all the YouTube comments from Christian conservatives who have turned against Israel. They're ending their messages with Christ as king. Well, what
Right.
does that mean? Christ means the anointed king. So you're saying king is king. Okay, do you even know what that term means? You're saying
That's funny. Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah,
you're
yeah.
saying
Getting
king
the
is king.
semantics now. King is
Right?
king. Yeah.
You don't even know what you're saying. And secondly, what you're saying is the anointed king of Israel, the king of the Jews, is king.
Right.
But you don't see it that way. You do not see, you have your basically replacement theology, um, de Judaized version of Jesus that you think is king. No, you are,
Mhm.
I mean, what you're actually saying is the king of the Jews should be your king. And then you're going to go
Mhm.
hate on his people. God is
Yeah.
going to hold you accountable for how you have treated the Jewish people. I'm a conservative, but at the same time, I recognize that God is not bound by a left right box. He's not some super libertarian American.
Right.
And he will hold you accountable for how you treat the Jewish people, even if they don't always behave the way that you want them to behave. He's
Mhm.
going to call you out, and he's already forewarned you about that. So do
Yeah.
it at your own risk.
Yeah.
But
I
if we go
in
back,
some of
yeah, go
those
ahead.
in some of these online debates, I've actually shared those scriptures, and I noticed that there's no critical thinking anymore. People
Mhm.
aren't answering back with, "Okay, that's I don't agree with that passage because," and then give a counter scripture or a counter argument. And I'm using New Testament scripture. I'm using New Testament scripture. I'm saying, here's what Jesus said. Here's what Paul said about the Jewish people. You know, uh, and how Paul, for example, warns the Gentiles who are coming into this Jewish faith, this Jewish rabbi, as Christ is king, as the king of the Jews, right? That's the whole point of the early followers is if he was this anti-Jewish rabbi, his claim to fame would have ended like very drastically and quickly, and I doubt he would have had any followers at all. But that wasn't the case. And so it's like they ignore that, and they get in these rabbit holes, and they go like into this crazy stuff. Instead, they're like, well, you know what the Talmud says, and you know what the this says, and I'm just like, oh my Lord, like, I'm
The
helping
real
you
the
all
real
out, I'm being
argument has
nice
to
to you.
be, yeah, the real
you know
argument
I'm
exactly
using
has
your
to
New
be,
Testament, like, I'm why are you going like, what like, where, why, hello, I'm helping you out here. I could use Jewish arguments, I'm using Christian arguments, I'm using your scripture to tell you this is what it says. And then I'm like, okay, so you do realize that if you're against Jesus, or sorry, if you're against the Jews, you're actually against Jesus's family. Okay. All right. And then I pointed out, I said, what the scripture says, or the what Jesus quotes, he says, you won't see me again. Who is the you? Who is he talking to? He's talking to a Jewish audience in Jerusalem. So he tells them, you won't see me again until you say, Baruch haba b'shem Adonai. Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. He's quoting the book of Psalms. He's quoting the messianic promise, right? That the Messiah will be welcomed by the people of Israel at the temple in Jerusalem, which is part of why we do Cry for Zion and explaining all these concepts. That's a very basic scriptural understanding. So you're telling me, because they're like, well, I'm a Catholic and we believe in replacement theology, basically. And they're like, that is the, that's what the Pope, has decreed. So it thus is. I'm like, I don't care what the Pope says. I don't care what any great rabbi of Israel says. If you're contradicting God's word, I'm not interested. I'm not interested in your great ideas. I'm not interested in your argument. And that's what I'm doing. I'm sticking to scriptural arguments. And these folks instead go to political ideas and jaded views based on whatever the politics are of the day and whatever their denomination decrees and so on. So can you weigh in on some of that, John? What do you have to
That's
say about that?
that is exactly where the argument has to be had. And the argument is basically over, well, if you turn against the Jewish people as a people, okay, we're not talking about individuals here. Some might be good, some might be bad, but you start getting collective about it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then you're turning against Jesus' family. And their argument is, well, Jesus turned against his family and they're his greatest enemies too. So I'm on Jesus' side. And then our counter argument is you are, perverting the New Testament. And let's look at what the New Testament says. Just like you said, that's where the argument needs to be. If you're really going to address the root causes and the Bible as a whole, you're turning the New
Yeah.
Testament against the Hebrew Bible as if they don't fit. Like it's the old Marcion heresy that the God of the Old Testament versus Jesus. I'm sorry, the Bible doesn't work that way. That's a fake faith. Um,
Mm.
that's where the argument needs to
Yeah.
be. Totally agree with you. And
Yeah.
they would, and if you don't see that God won't betray his promises, he is unchanging, that he's eternal, he's the same in the book of Exodus as he is in the New Testament, and his faithfulness towards Israel, he's made promises. Yes, he knows about sin, he knows about all of our sin, but he is faithful and unchanging. And if he can betray his promises to the Jewish people, he can betray them to anybody. Um, and
Mm-hmm.
that's the Muslim argument, right? They're like,
Yeah.
well, Christians say that that the Jewish people have made mistakes, so God has gotten rid of them and chosen a new people, us, the church. And then the Muslims are like, well, if he didn't have to stick with it with the Jews, then he doesn't stick it with it for you Christians either. And now he's chosen us, and Muhammad is the final prophet.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Yeah.
really,
Exactly.
I know serious theologians who call Islam just a Christian heresy. There were, right? There were
Yeah.
Christians involved with Muhammad at the founding of the faith, who, in fact, he would have abandoned the idea. When I was reading for my theological studies, studying an Oxford textbook on Islam, they said openly, Muhammad thought he was hearing demons, these revelations, and was going to commit suicide, but Christians convinced him that he was having angelic revelations and should stick with it, right?
That's, isn't that crazy? Isn't that crazy? Right.
Yeah.
And by the way, just to weigh in a little bit on that too, because this is part of my studies that I've done for the tour guiding course here in Israel, and we study Christians, Muslims, Circassians, whatever. We study all the different minority groups and whatever, so that as a
Mm,
tour guide, I can point at any ethnic group here, faith group, and give you a little bit of tidbits about what they believe, what they, what that uniform is they're wearing, etc. And so when we studied Islam, that's exactly the case. When you understand the region that Muhammad started his new faith with, that region, and a lot of Jews don't even like this, by the way, as well. It kind of rubs you wrong because the faith groups were so how do I say like the Jews and Christians mainly, and then Muslims. They were very much intertwined in their in their faith. Like they were more, how to say, they shared more similar values to where there would have been cross marriages more openly then than it would be today,
Hmm.
is the point. And, Jews don't like to hear that and be like, no, 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 we would never let our, children marry a Christian or a Muslim, and so on. And either one of the other ones will say the same. But
Right.
that was the area he was living in. There was more of a mutual worldview, so to speak, faith wise. And these camps that we have today weren't so divided, so to speak, and sort of,
Right.
which is
And
also why it
Muhammad
made it so
is
easy
expecting
for
Jews and
Muhammad to
Christians to get on
rise up.
board. You like you can
Exactly.
see from his life, he is expecting Christians and Jews to get on board with his message. Like he sees himself
Right.
as inside the discussion, right?
Because he was.
So, we can talk about this as real facts of history.
Yeah.
When it comes to the Christians turning against Israel and the Jewish people in the current war, then it comes down to these type of questions, and they would accuse us of like, no, I'm using critical thinking. It's because you guys are all going along with the conservative narrative that you have to support Israel. We're willing to look critically, like, why should we ever support
Hmm.
the Jews, right?
If they're doing wrong,
If
right? Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
so
So it's
let's get
it's
into
it's a
some of the
legit
weeds.
argument. Sure.
Yeah, let's get into some of the weeds on the bill, and a little bit about the New Testament and the bill and so on. So
Hmm.
I think tactically it's a foolish bill, shouldn't have been proposed. Um, is the definition in the bill of anti-Semitism, is it correct? It's using the famous IHRA working definition of anti-Semitism, which has long been a discussed definition of anti-Semitism, which is better than most. And it says if you call modern Israelis and the state of Israel collectively in our current day a Christ killing nation, guilty of deicide and killing Jesus, they are responsible for that today. That is an expression of anti Semitism. Is that true? Yeah,
Hmm.
it's true. Is it saying that it's not saying that if you look at the New Testament and that Jewish theopolitical rulers in Jerusalem had a hand in the death of Jesus? No, that's not anti Semitic according to the definition. Not at all.
Hmm.
Um, and the New Testament, as far as it's concerned, it's very clear about that Jesus had Jewish followers, that he was very popular among the people, but that the rulers, the theopolitical rulers, especially the Sadducees, some Pharisees, um, didn't like Jesus and got rid of him and handed
Hmm.
him over to the Romans, who physically carried it out. So, are there expressions in the New Testament that say that there is like a political responsibility among that generation of the Jewish people for the death of Jesus?
Hmm.
Yeah, there are. At the same time as it's Jewish people talking about that to other Jewish people, and that there are also tens of thousands of Jewish followers of Jesus. It's like an internal discussion and talking about very biblical concepts of political leadership responsibilities, right?
Hmm.
Does
Yeah.
the New Testament teach that this is some sort of guilt that goes on for the Jewish people and all their descendants, all Jews for all time? No,
Hmm.
that's very wrong and sick. It's not what the New Testament teaches. Therefore,
Yeah.
the IHRA working definition of anti Semitism rightly says that if you say that modern Israelis, by heritage of mere fact of being Jews and Israelis, are Christ killers, it's an expression of anti Semitism. Yes, it is. Now, the next point
Hmm.
is what is anti Semitism? It's Jew hate. Okay. Should you
All right.
legislate laws about Jew hate? In an American context in 2024, probably not. Are we seeing worrying signs of what's going on college campuses and on the streets of major cities? And should something be done? Probably yes. So,
Hmm.
okay, is the definition of anti Semitism probably correct? Yes. And then the other criticism comes, right? the other definition that's true in the IHRA is if holding Israel to a different political standard, right? Which is exactly
Hmm.
what's going on with Gaza, right? 30,000 have been killed. I didn't hear a peep during the Syrian civil war just a few miles from here when hundreds of thousands died. I didn't hear nothing hardly about the civil war in Yemen, where much more died during the entire. I mean, we heard controversy some about coalition forces in Iraq, but the numbers. So, why are we focusing so specifically on a conflict in Gaza where the numbers compared to what's going on maybe today in Eastern Africa, right? Already as we speak, that's not making the news.
Yeah.
Why
And
is
I've been
this
to some of those places,
outsized?
by the way.
Why is
I've
this
seen I've
outsized
seen the
focus?
fruit. Yeah, I've seen the fruit of pure race hatred in Africa, right? So blacks
Mhm.
hating on blacks because of a tribal difference, a linguistic difference, a slight difference in the ethnic, um, like the facial or slight in the color. Because I'm like, as a white guy, I'm like, I don't understand. Like, aren't you guys all the same? In my ignorance, and they're like, no, we're not. Can't you see? And then after being there for long enough in that particular country, I'm not going to label which country. It doesn't matter. But while
Mm.
being there long enough, you start to see what they're pointing out, and I'm like, oh, okay, now I can see what you're all saying because I'm not from there. But when they point it out to you, and you start to see it, and you're like, wow. So literally, because of these small ethnic differences and tribal norms or what have you, literally, you guys are slaughtering each other over that, and it's heartbreaking because it's like, you're used to it's Arabs against Jews or the
No, it's
slave trade,
Palestinians.
Europeans, yeah, Europeans against blacks, or not against, but enslaving blacks and so on from Africa. and
Hmm.
and so you see that, and you can understand, it seems like, okay, I get it, we're way different. But it's like when you're there, where some of these horrible and the worst genocides have happened in modern history, and for years ongoing, it's over these small differences. Same in the Middle East, by the way. You talked about Syria. These are Arabs that were slaughtering Arabs for a difference in Islamic worldview and slash tribal, right? Because it's the same as in Africa, as far as it's like slight family relation differences, and these people were just slaughtering each other over that. And that's heartbreaking. It's like, what's happening in Ukraine and Russia. That's heartbreaking. These are ethnically the same people groups that are literally slaughtering each other over political differences, what have you. These are heartbreaking. Any of these are heartbreaking. And the point being, like you pointed out, why the obsession of looking at what's
Yeah.
happening in Israel when there is a clear why we're against each other, so to speak. And Israel is literally in a war of defense, not offense. And we're not in a war of taking over land. We're in a war of defending our civilians from rocket fire that's happening as we're having this conversation. It's happening right now. Today, I can guarantee you there are going to be rockets fired into Israel from Gaza. There'll be rockets fired into Israel from Lebanon. It's been happening since day one that this war broke out, and before. So we're literally
The
defending
question is
ourselves.
the outsized focus. Why are you so obsessed, right? That's
Yeah,
so forget the bill, but let's
when
get
it's
to
the
the
most
definition.
justified.
Let's
Yeah,
get to the definition of anti-Semitism, right? Does
yeah,
the
yeah.
IHRA correctly address the uneven standards towards Israel? Like, can you be critical of Israel? Yes, fine. But then
Yes.
you have to have the same standards. And that's a biblical thing. God hates unequal weights and measures. So, equal weights and measures.
Mhm.
You're going to be critical of Israel on a certain point, then you need to hold other countries to the same standard. So, with the
Exactly.
obsession of Gaza, you tell me, what is the deadliest conflict since World War II till today? Hardly anyone knows. What's your guess?
Yep.
What would be your guess?
Mike, since World War II, the deadliest conflict, probably the Congo. I don't know.
Yes, as far as I
See, I
know,
don't
it's
even
the
know.
as far as I know, it's the Congo. That's something that no
Yeah.
one's ever
I
heard
can't believe
of.
I got that. I
Like,
thought for sure it was something else.
it's something like five
Sorry.
million deaths, right?
It's, yeah, it's
Over a
horrible.
span
And
of
I've met
decades and decades and decades.
Yeah, and I've met
And
Congolese people and heard their stories, and I'm like, oh my lord, this is horrible. Like I can't believe, and nobody
yeah,
talks about it.
so
Rarely.
then then you
It's out there,
they did
but
a
it's
survey.
like a minute mention, like a footnote in world history. You know.
They did a survey among university students in Australia and said, we want modern, millennials to rank what you think are the 10 deadliest conflicts in the world. And most of it put like Palestine, Israel at the top, and it doesn't even make the top 10. So
Yeah. Yeah.
this
I
is
mean,
an
for sure.
outside.
That's yeah.
So the IHRA is saying, if you're using unequal weights and measures when it comes to evaluating your critique of the state of Israel, this obsession, right? Then you
Yeah.
could be in the grounds of anti-Semitism. Is that true? Yes, it's true. You're really getting at, and then conservatives in America are saying, like, because it's introduced to a bill now, and that's
Mhm.
true. Are you getting into freedom of speech issues when you're saying, oh, I can't criticize the foreign policy of a foreign nation? No,
Mhm.
you should be able to do that. Are you wrong and stupid and probably sometimes hateful? Or maybe you're even anti-Semitic? Yeah, probably true. In the context of American freedom of speech, should that be outlawed? I don't know how far the conservative foundations of America can last, however, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
Do I think we should
Well, I
all have
think
freedom? Freedom
yeah.
of speech comes with a lot of responsibility.
Yep. And I think the key too is to answer that question you just asked, or the few questions you asked, is well, who are the founding fathers of the United States? What was their worldview? What was their ambition? When you study the history of the United States, you realize that the ambition was to mimic Israel, historic Israel, biblical Israel. That was their, in fact, Hebrew was one of the languages that was suggested of what should be the new language of the new colonies in North America. Like this is how strongly their biblical worldview was, is what I'm basically saying is. And can you imagine that those founding fathers, if they had ever thought that their freedoms of speech and freedom of religion ideals that they fought for, bled for, would have
Mm,
been perceived that you can turn on what we're aspiring to, they probably would have worded it a little bit differently, I believe, for sure. They would have been very careful to give the warnings. And that's why I like to use Paul, because that's exactly what Paul did. He says to the Gentiles, hey, you're welcome to join, my people and be part of the commonwealth of Israel, but be careful. Don't be arrogant. Don't think that you're better than them, because remember, they're the root and you're a branch that is grafted into the commonwealth of Israel. The founding fathers knew this very well, in my opinion, because when I've studied what they said, what they wrote, what they lived for, what they bled for, that's what they fought for. That's a true patriot. And I think
mm,
that goes back to what we originally said here, is that the problem is, I think, is that people are really truly ignorant of scripture, Bible understanding, and how that actually relates to their political worldviews that have been affected by that, especially if you go to the founding fathers. I'm not talking about modern day nonsense and let's constantly push the goalposts. I'm talking about what was their ambition? What was their purpose in creating the United States? It was that. It was that. And had they had the dream and understanding that Israel would be rebirthed, I mean, can you imagine their excitement and I would imagine their desire to do everything to support it, be a part of it, because to them it's like, no way, that's actually that prophecy is going to be fulfilled in our time, in our day, and that's what's happened to their generation, their offsprings, who today are completely against Israel in so many ways. Again, we're talking about those who have perceived these bills and the infringement on freedom of speech.
mm.
I have the freedom of speech, and I've said this before too, but not at the expense of throwing the other under the bus, destroying the character and faith. You won't hear me talking about Muslims the way a lot of people, conservatives, talk about Muslims publicly. I don't try
Mm.
to uglify Muslims. You
Dehumanize,
know,
as they say.
yeah, dehumanize and so on. Like the argument is
Mm,
is on point. If I'm talking about the problem of Islam. I'm talking about the Islamists. I'm talking about the jihadists. I'm not saying all Muslims believe this, and that's the problem. And it's like in any culture, in any everything, it's those extremists that ruin it for the whole. And instead of saying, okay, that's their opinion, that's that, but it doesn't represent us. These folks are saying, no, that does represent us. It's freedom of speech. I can say what I want, even if it's going to offend Jews. And the Jews are the ones that said, crucify him, and that's exactly what happened. So I will say that, and I will die on that hill, you know. And it's like, okay, so you just exercise your freedom of speech. Congratulations, bravo,
It's bringing all the Christian misunderstandings and replacement theology of the New Testament and of the Bible as a whole to the front. That's coming
Yeah,
out because of this situation, and in whole, like you look at Tucker Carlson and his crazy interview with Munter Isaac, pastor in Bethlehem. Like, it's bringing a lot of this to the front. At the same time, I
yeah.
will flip and say this bill, from the other perspective, is a blunder. It's a
Oh, yeah.
bad idea, right? Because what's
Mhm.
happening in America and in the West when it comes to free speech? This is the situation
Mm.
with Elon Musk. Um,
Yeah.
did he say everything perfectly? No, but his point was there are liberal, leftist, Marxist Jews who don't share biblical values, and those groups are going out to silence conservatives in the name of anti Semitism. Is that true? Yes,
Yep.
it's true.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
they are in positions. So this one, a great video on this was from Israel 365, Rabbi Pesach Waliki. He put out a video on the situation with Elon Musk a few months ago. And his point
Mhm.
was, I have more in common with conservative biblical Christians who share my values than these hyper progressive Marxist, liberal, atheistic Jews. Okay. And they
100%.
are wrongly going after Elon Musk in this particular situation because of his stance on free speech. And they want to go after him.
Mhm.
I'm an Orthodox Jewish rabbi, and what is happening right now with the ADL and Elon Musk, if you're following it on social media, it's absolutely infuriating me. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, take a minute and listen up. The ADL, the Anti-Defamation League, was founded over 100 years ago by B'nai B'rith, a major Jewish organization. The purpose of the ADL was to fight anti-Semitism. But ever since former senior advisor to Barack Obama, Jonathan Greenblatt, took over the ADL in 2015, he has turned it into an arm of the extreme progressive left, leading the way in the silencing of conservative voices. Greenblatt even brags openly that he works closely with major social media companies to censor and ban influencers who are opposed to the extreme left-wing agenda. Nothing to do with anti-Semitism. Join me in saying it loud and clear. Stop the ADL.
So, in this context, they put out this bill to restrict freedom of speech in certain ways in America, whether you agree with the particulars, whether people understand the nuances of anti Semitism. You introduce this bill in this context when this is happening. Is
Mhm.
it the only ones that are going to like it are Jews, maybe some supporters of Israel who are already supporting Israel. Everyone else who's
Mhm.
fence sitting are going to hate it, right?
Yeah.
There are no
Because
gains.
it's wrong.
There are no political gains
Yeah.
to be made by the initiative, and only losses, big losses, as we see
Well,
happening
I'll
now.
I'll I'll correct you on that. There are political gains, and that's the thing. Is this bill is being introduced when the White House right now, the current administration, is one of the most anti-Semitic, anti-Israel governments or administrations of
Administrations,
the United
yeah.
States. Yeah, that to date. And I think what the conservatives are missing is that what they did is like the shift blame thing, the game of like, it's not me, it's him. He's the bad. Look, so what they're doing is they're hiding their anti-Semitism. They're hiding their contempt for Israel with this half-hearted attempt with with this hearing
Right.
that of like, let's redefine, let's this, let's that, and that is, it's just a smokescreen. And the conservatives are, and they knew the conservatives would come out of the woodwork. I believe they're not stupid. Okay, they knew the conservatives would go ballistic, and they knew that now they're going to get more people on their side to be against Israel. And it worked perfectly. That's exactly what happened. They laid the trap. You guys stepped right in it, and you played their game. So for those of you who have fallen for this, really think about how you've been duped and literally trapped into reacting the way you did, and then causing people like me to react the way I did. And not, because I think people misunderstand. I'm not saying you're an anti-Semite because you said XYZ. Because I called out some people on the last podcast and exposed how they reacted and how they fell for the bait, and that the way they handled their responses were just tone deaf. Because you're responding because, well, it got publicized just before Holocaust Memorial Day here in Israel. So the publication of this bill got publicized, perfect timing. You guys reacted just in time for Holocaust Memorial Day, where Jews have had one of the most anti-Semitic, horrible attempts of genocide against us since the Holocaust. And as we are mourning and we're thinking of what just recently happened to us, this fresh wound on us from October 7th, and then we see what we thought were friends of Israel, or at least had shared conservative values, are making some stupid statements. And I'm like, I can't believe you're saying this. Like, do you even understand how this is coming across? They don't. I don't think they do. They don't mean to be mean. They don't mean to be negative. They're trying to exercise their freedom of speech. I get it, but let's like pay attention to what's happening around you, because you're being played. Is
To
my
me,
message.
yeah. To me, the underlying foundation is, unless you're going to get tested on this, first of
Yeah.
all, and I'm speaking particularly to the Christian right, the conservative Christian right, obviously. But even still, if you don't believe in God and the world, I think you're going to get deceived, right? But speaking to those who already do believe in God, looking at the Bible, unless you get a firm grasp on God's purposes and his faithfulness to Israel, you will also be deceived, right? And
Mhm.
you can see it also with some of the people who I like. They're troubled by this bill, and they're saying, like, well, it says that Jews were involved in the death of Jesus, so I will die on that hill. Like, how dare you attack my faith? It doesn't mean that I hate Jews or whatever. Like, you're going to smear me because I stand up just for historical facts, whatever, based on
Right.
my belief in the Bible. Well, first of all, your position is basically Jesus' family were his biggest enemies. A lot of these people are saying Jesus' families was his biggest enemies, and so I will hate them along with him, right? Which
Yeah.
I think
That's
is
that's why his
very
brother takes
unbiblical.
over the
Yeah.
disciples, being the head of the disciples in Jerusalem and so on. Right.
So problem exactly. So problem is replacement theology. I would recommend the book Israel Matters by Gerald McDermott as a good start. And then the second thing
Yeah.
is, you're woefully ignorant of the history, right? You
Hmm.
don't understand why the accusation Christ killers is a huge problem, right? For 2,000
Exactly.
years of church history. And you should be
Hmm.
reading the book Our Hands Are Stained with Blood by Michael L. Brown. That's what people have not read, and why this is absolutely tragic.
Hmm.
What happens with those kind of accusations, and we're
What
not
it
just
what it
talking
can
about,
fuel.
yeah, what has happened historically again and again and again and again and again for a massive part of civilization's history. This is not just some fluke that happened once. This is a repeated
Hmm.
pattern, which is why some Jews may be willing to be like, yeah, who cares about freedom of speech? Do you know how many times we've died for this?
Exactly.
Right? And
Yeah.
so, if unless you're going to use freedom of speech responsibly, to not just be an idiot, yeah, will civilization one day decline? Do I look like I'm seeing the decline of America and American political game falling into a court, a mockery, a foolishness in politics, yeah, it looks like the decline of the West. Not just America, the UK, Sweden is already way ahead of you, my native country.
We've seen that.
we are far fools way ahead on the train, where
Yeah.
the West is trying to head. And
Yeah.
returning to some sort of like Catholic cultural dominance where Christianity is the ruling power and have the levers of power and Christ is king. Is that the answer? No, I don't think so. I think God is holding everyone responsible to what he said in his word. And he has said a lot about the Jewish people. And you say like, well, America first means Israel is not first, right? Why should I put Israel first?
Mm-hmm.
Fine, that might be a libertarian argument you could make. Question is, God, who gave you the freedoms that you have, who gave you the blessing that you have in your nation, he holds you responsible to things, and they do pertain to the Jewish people. When you stand before the creator of the universe and he has made choices, he has made decisions and said, I'm holding you responsible for this, regardless of your libertarian or isolationist foreign policy or whatever political theories you may have. This, what did you do to the least of my physical brothers? Jesus says. And I think he's referring to at least the Jewish people on that issue.
And
when he gathers the
the
nations
biblical,
before him, it says.
yeah, and the
Right.
biblical promise that God makes to Abraham, which in the last podcast I actually misquoted it. So here's a correction, because I was like, oh no, I but what I was explaining is that God made a promise to Abraham that whoever belittles you will be cursed. And I said that the word cursed means belittled. No, forgive me, what I meant was what I just said here, which is those who belittle you, not those who curse you, but those who belittle Israel, okay, the seed of Abraham, those people will be cursed. That's a pretty heavy warning to me, at least
That's
biblical warning
unfair.
to the
Why is God
nations.
singling out a single family on the earth and says he'll judge
Yeah,
everybody based on that? That's not fair. God is
yeah,
partial,
well,
right? Christianity got
yeah,
rid of that. That's why he got rid of the Jews, because that was just a temporary idea. God doesn't care about that anymore. He loves everybody. Yes, he loves
yeah,
everybody. Is God impartial? Yes, he is, but not in the way that you and I think in some modern political sense. Paul writes
hmm
in Romans, he says, there will be greater responsibility for the Jewish people first, and then there will be responsibility judgment on non-Jews. There will be blessing for Jewish people first, and then also blessing for non-Jews. This is Paul writing, right? In the beginning of Romans.
yeah,
So, and then he says, then Paul asks, is God, because Paul makes this comment, because God is not impartial. Well, that doesn't really fit with our modern
no,
political
it doesn't.
thoughts, right? But it's this
Yeah,
principle that Jesus was hammering on all the time. To whom much is given, much is required.
hmm
So they get the special choice. Fine. Then there are greater responsibilities that come with that and greater blessings. And
yeah,
also for Gentiles. And it has, so is that fair? Yes, it is. In the biblical perspective, that is God's measuring stick. Does it fit with
right,
your libertarian ideology or whatever you may have? Maybe not. But that's the biblical definition in the New Testament about God being impartial. To whom much is
hmm
given, much is required, but also much blessing, right? And yes, I agree. God loves everybody the same, but he will hold you accountable for what it says in Genesis 12:3. It still applies.
hmm
I don't care how tired you are of hearing it. If you belittle God's choice, you are cursing yourself. You're shooting yourself in the foot. God will himself require that of you. So
it's
that were some
dangerous
of the
waters to be
thoughts
in
we
for
had.
sure. Yeah, no, that's some dangerous waters to be in for sure. And a thing I want to also point out for the audience: listen, John and I are not drumming this beat of you have to have special considerations towards Israel. You have to have some kind of special, like walk on eggshells when you're criticizing Israel. That's not what we're saying. You can be critical of policies that the nation of Israel makes, of a bunch of different things, and that's not the problem. The besides, as a Jew, and I can tell you from fellow Jews, nobody I've ever met in Israel, not one Israeli, not one Jew, that has said, "Hey, I love being chosen. It's so great to be chosen." In fact, what you will hear us say many times is, God, why us? Why did you choose us to be singled out by the world, by you, but then by the world? Why? Why this heavy weight of everything that we do is going to be looked at with a microscope, so to speak? And it's like, why me? Like, leave us alone. That is the very common Jewish viewpoint on this. We don't like to be singled out either. So you might think that somehow this is like benefiting us by saying what Scripture has to say, like what John just pointed out, and God being not fair. I think God's very fair. Do I agree with God's fairness as a human, as a person, as someone who has free ideas? No, I think it's unfair. I don't think it's right, but nobody cares about what I think. And I'm being honest. Like when I look at that, I go, that's not fair, you know. But it's what God deemed and what God planned through His Word and through His purposes on the earth. And if that's what God has, and if I've chosen to believe in God and to believe in His Word, then that's what you need to learn to embrace. You have to learn to embrace things that don't rub you right. God's Word will rub you wrong, and it rubs me wrong all the time, and it confronts me all the time. And there are things I struggle with what God is saying and what He demands from us all the time, because it doesn't feel fair. It doesn't feel right.
It rubs
And I think
against
that's important to just
our nature.
our nature, yeah. And that's normal, and that's fine. But just to throw that out here, because I don't think it's important. People, we're not trying to advocate, this is da 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 because it benefits us. It doesn't. It actually
Mm,
singles us out. Like we're saying, also, don't
exactly.
single us out. So on the one hand, we're saying
But
stop.
but
The world needs to stop. But
but to that point, I
yeah,
also want to end on that note, is that
yeah,
when injustices are committed against Israel, and I'm being able to see firsthand the perspectives and how it hurts people locally here, both Jews and Arabs, with the ignorance and the attacks that come from the nations, does it hurt me and make me upset or angry sometimes with righteous indignation? Yes. But the reason I'm going hard after Christian conservatives in the West and the way that they are losing it when it comes to Israel is for
mm,
concern for them. Because I'm saying God is going to hold us as Christians accountable for this. And it's going to get to be a tougher test. It's going to be more and more tough on this issue. And it's my concern for America. It's the reason I love America that I am issuing this warning, right? Not because I'm
mm,
afraid that somehow when nations attack Israel, I think God will protect Israel. Israel will be fine in the end. But my concern is for those who are attacking, right? Because that
mhm,
judgment will be harsh because it's coming from
mm,
God, not from man.
mhm. 100%. And Israel will be fine in the end, not because no matter what, Israel will be fine, because God said so. It's in the prophecies that have been given for the end times that Israel will fail. Israel will do miserably. We won't be a faithful nation all the way to the end, and we're seeing it right now. If you look at Tel Aviv, you look at different parts of the country, but Tel Aviv being where the root of a lot of the ungodly behavior, pro-homosexual movement, pro-anti-God movements, pro all this stuff, it comes from, it's rooted here. There is a seed of evil in the country. It's not that we're this high, holy rolling, perfect country. We all fear God. We're all whatever. That's not at all the case. But you can't judge the nation of Israel based on those bad apples. First of all, because I can tell you, as one who lives here, the majority of the people that are of the populace of Israel, they fear God. The majority of Christians and Muslims here, they fear God. When you have normal conversations with them, a lot of them have more of a relationship with God than you as a conservative in the West. I've learned, and you're welcome to come here and prove me wrong on that. Same with the Druze, and all these other minorities. Like there is actually, for those who have more of a biblical compass, if you will, here, irregardless of Jew, Muslim, Christian, whatever, it's like people here take their faith a little bit more seriously, is what I'm basically saying. And you're basically criticizing something you don't understand, you don't know, you haven't seen. And that's something that I think that is exciting when I see Christians that come here that I normally have interactions with, and they tour the land of Israel, they want to tour the land of the Bible. It's like their faith becomes impacted in a new way. Their walk with God changes because they realize how far off the mark they've been most of their lives. And it's like they have this kind of like a reboot. And so I want to challenge you, if you're a Christian, if you're a conservative, if you live somewhere in the West or Europe or wherever you're watching this from, I welcome you. Come to Israel, experience this country physically with your eyes, with your feet, and with your spirit. And you will see that a lot of what you had viewed and believed about this land and about the nation of Israel, and certain prejudices that you might have had, it will jar you. Not everybody gets convinced. Not everybody, comes here and has this magical like experience. That's not what I'm saying. It's not guaranteed. There are people that came here jaded and they leave jaded. And I've seen those, and I look at them and I just scratch my head. I'm like, man, you must have some thick skin, because it's like, I've seen that too. And it's like, dang, man, like really, like after all that, you still want to, because there's some people that their worldview is more important than reality on the ground, right? And so we have that as well. John, is there anything you want to end with while we've been bringing up some of these big issues? To me, these are big issues. I think they're big, they're important. They affect, like you said, the West. They affect how God will either bless you or curse you. And remember, it's God, not us, not Israel, not humanity, not people, not political opinions. It's God's word. And so
I would say just that the concern lies with mainly the church. I think we need to be a voice for truth, but I think there will be a test in what's happening these days. We're already seeing it, in which way you are going to respond based on what God has revealed in his word. And the main test that concerns me is for the Christian church in the West and around the world. I mean, it's going to be a pressure about, I think, obviously, the pressure for us as Christians is your faithfulness to Jesus. But secondly, I think the further time goes, it's also going to be a test of how do you treat Jesus' physical brothers, his physical people, and what God has promised regarding the people of Israel. And I am praying and hoping that as many as possible don't fail that test.
Yeah, me too. John, thank you so much for being on the podcast, brother. I really appreciate it. I thank you for sharing some of your really valued insights that I enjoy just through our casual conversations that we've had throughout the years. And guys, I hope you enjoyed this podcast, this episode. Please make sure to share this, to like it, to get it out, because we're being shadow banned. My voice is being muffled right now, good friends of ours who are trying to host an event in Nashville to talk about Israel, to talk about the things that John and I have just discussed now. So the ones who are trying to say something about it, their voice is being silenced. Their venue got shut down where they had already had a contract for where they're going to host this event, and now they're actually looking for an alternative because of basically pro-Palestine, anti-Israel thugs that have threatened the venue, the place that where they were going to be hosting this event. So, what am I saying in that? That there are many people who think the way we do, that can communicate and explain these things in a good, clear way, but our voices are being silenced. The social media platforms are literally working against us. I'm being shadow banned, and so on. So the only way we can get these messages and this narrative to get out is through you. You're going to have to share this with your friend. Your friends are going to have to share it with their friends, and that's how we can get these messages shared across the different platforms. Because, by the way, and here's a fun fact, you can check me on this. If you start to look in the search bar section of, for example, Instagram, until you have perfectly written out my name, okay, and until the very last letter of my full name, you won't even get an option of Doron Keidar. So when people want to search for me because I've been on an interview or whatever, can't find me. You misspelled my name by one letter. That's it. Gone. And that's just one example. And I can tell you, on the contrary, if I try to search any other person's platform, I'm not even putting out how they're publicly appearing, I will end up there one way or other, and I don't even have to spell out their full name. So that's just an example. Another way to help support this message and this podcast is to go to our Patreon. I'll make sure there's a link to this episode. Go to the Patreon, support us. We'll make sure that with time and as this grows, that you're going to get perks, that you're going to get special insights that the majority are not going to get on these podcasts that go public. We'll make sure that you get special perks. And that's how we can get this message amplified. So thank you for your support. Thank you for following. And may God bless you all from Israel. Shalom.